with you and share some of my story and then give you opportunity to ask me any questions. Okay. So know that I'm very open. I'm open to any questions that come up in your mind at the end. So, are there any NASCAR fans here? I'm sorry. NASCAR fans? Any NASCAR fans? No? Wow. Am I still in Indiana? Okay. Really? So you can call my story left turn. You know how the cars in NASCAR, they just keep going around left turn, left. You can call my story left turn. So I was raised in South Central Los Angeles. My parents moved from Indianapolis, Indiana to South Central Los Angeles when I was 3 years old. I was actually born in Indianapolis. My parents moved to South Central Los Angeles, and I grew up amongst gangs, drugs, violence. I grew up on the west side of Los Angeles. I was involved in it all as a young man, as a young child, teenager. But I made my first left turn when I was 15 years old. When I was 15 years old, I did what they call, I jumped off the porch. Anybody know what that slang means? Well, when you say a young man or a young girl jumps off the porch, it means that they leave the security of being a child, doing children things, playing with children, having adults oversee them and protect them, to doing what adults do, to having sex, using drugs, and committing violence. Okay, so at the age of 15, I jumped off the porch into a drug dealing lifestyle. I actually left home at 15 years old. I was selling drugs, and I got my own apartment, got my own car, and I became a drug dealer. By the age of 17, I made another left turn. I was responsible for transporting cocaine from Los Angeles, California to the Midwest and the South, in the southern states, Jackson, Mississippi, Atlanta, Memphis, Tennessee, St. Louis, and right here to Indianapolis. Now, the feds already know, because I made another left turn at 18 and I participated in a shootout with the Memphis Police Department, and a police officer was shot. Fortunately, the officer didn't pass away. He healed from his injuries, and I went to federal prison. Well, me and a friend of mine went to federal prison. I was 18 years old. We went to federal prison for attempted murder on a police officer and a drug conspiracy for transporting and distributing drugs. Well, when we went to prison, I was 18 years old, I was young, and I was wild. Okay. Remember I said I jumped off the porch at 15. So when I jumped off the porch at 15 and I moved and I went out in the streets and I started hustling, I started living on my own, I also dropped out of what? High school. I dropped out of high school. So when I went to prison at 18 years old, I could not pass, of course, the GED test. I couldn't even pass the ABE test. Any educators in here? You know the ABE, 8th grade equivalency test? So when I went to federal prison at 18, I could not pass the ABE test. But during the time that I went to prison at 18 years old, which was a few years ago, we ain't gonna talk about how old I am right now. When I went to prison at 18, you had men in the prison that used to find ways to get under the young people's skin to irritate them, which really encouraged us to do things like get your GED. So while I was in prison, I went to the education department and I got my GED. However, at 18 years old, I'm in federal prison. I must say I had a rabbit's foot in my pocket because I was young and wild. My first 10 months I spent in solitary confinement. And the reason why I spent those first 10 months in the hole was because I used to attack guards and I kept getting in fights with other inmates, and I was just wild. I didn't have any real understanding of my circumstance. I felt like, hey, this is it. I might be here for life, so I might as well just act up. Anyway, I had a rabbit's foot in my pocket. After doing about 2.5 years, my case was overturned in the federal court, 6th Circuit Court of Appeals. So when my case got overturned, I got a letter from my lawyer. And in fact, before I got the letter from my lawyer, I was walking around on the prison compound with a couple friends, and a guy in the prison seen me and he was like, hey, aren't you Montez Day? I was like, yeah. They're like, man, your case got overturned. You're going back to court. I was 8. I think I was 20 at the time when my case got overturned. I was like, me going back to court? Whatever. A couple weeks later, I got a letter from my lawyer saying that my case had got overturned and I was going back to court. So when I went back to court, they offered me a deal, of course. They would dismiss the other charges and give me immediate release if I pled guilty to aiding and abetting in drugs. I pled guilty. I was released at 21 years old. I didn't really know what to do. The honest truth is I was planning to be in prison for a certain amount of time. So all the things I was doing in the prison was banked on me getting out 5-6 years later. It wasn't banked on me getting out immediately. So when I got out of prison, I went and got a job. I met a woman. I fell in love. We was planning to get married. We also was planning to have a child. And I fell on hard times. It's simple. They had an earthquake in 1994 in California, and I got laid off from work. And when I got laid off from work, I had these bills, I had this family. I resorted back to what I knew, and that was criminal activity. And I found myself making another left turn. This time I was back in federal prison, and I was facing, I was doing approximately 4 years. When I went back, I had to do 4 years. While in federal prison this second time, I was real bitter. I was real angry. Because when I got out the first time, I thought that I had it figured out. I had a job, I had a fiance, we were about to start a family, and natural disaster, earthquake, I lost my job, I lost my income, I couldn't find employment. So I was real bitter, and I felt like society had took something from me. And so when I went to prison, I was angry, and to be 100% honest, the second time I went to prison, I had no thought or desire to do right. The whole time I was in prison, all I could think of was when I get out, what I was going to do. And none of it was positive. While I was in prison, I have an aunt, my father's sister. She has been in my life since I was a baby. Well, while I was in prison, she was writing me and she was coming to visit me along with my father and other family members. But she was really encouraging me and trying to get me to find what I love to do in life, which I didn't have a clue. So when I got out of prison the second time, I was strictly focused on committing crimes. I was so angry and I had so much malice in my heart that the day I got out of prison, I had a friend that was in the streets committing crimes. I had him come pick me up so that I could go commit a crime before I checked into the halfway house. I was trying to connect with people and start making money immediately. Okay. But what I did say is that with all of that, even while I was in the streets and I was committing crimes, I've always had a love for books. I was the guy that when a person would call me and say, hey, let's meet over here so I can give you some drugs, or let's meet over here so I can give you some credit cards. Whatever I was doing at the time, I would tell them, hey, meet me at Barnes & Noble. And they'd be like, Barnes & Noble? Man, just meet me on College and 15th Street in that parking lot. And I would pull up into the parking lot of Barnes & Noble, and I'd get in the back of my vehicle, and I would pick up a book and start reading a book and waiting for them to pull up. When they pulled up, I'd put my book down, and I would pick up my gun. And then I would do whatever transaction, whether I was selling drugs, whether I was buying credit card numbers, or whatever I was doing in the moment, I would put my gun down, I would put my book down and pick up my gun and handle my business. Then I'll pick my book back up, or I'll go in Barnes & Noble and buy another book. I just love to read, right? So when I got out of prison that second time, I was so focused on I was just mad. I was angry. I had a lot of hatred in my heart. So when I got out of prison that second time, I jumped right back on a NASCAR track. I mean, I immediately started committing crimes. I immediately was looking for ways to just get money. After being out of prison for a little while, I ended up and committed another left turn. This left turn was so big, I tell people I should have spent out and crashed. Y'all know on NASCAR when they be going around that track, they be bumping into each other, and then all of a sudden you just have a big wreck in the car. That should have been me. I was 28 years old. I had a 4-year-old daughter, and what I didn't tell you is that when I went to prison the second time, I ran into a friend who used to sell drugs with me in Sacramento, California. And he was like, hey, do you know so-and-so? Well, she has a baby by one of your friends, which happened to be me. Because she knew an alias name. She didn't know my real name. So this whole time I had a 5-year-old daughter I didn't know about. So when I got out of prison, I had a young daughter. I had two daughters. The lady that I was engaged to be married to had a daughter while I was incarcerated, and then I had a 5-year-old daughter that already existed in Sacramento that I didn't know anything about. So when I got out of prison the second time, I was just focused on committing crimes. When I committed the last incident, which I say I should have spent out and crashed, I committed one of the most violent crimes outside of murder. And you're probably like, well, you shot the police. That was violent, right? But this time I committed an armed takeover bank robbery. And what that means is that me and another person put on ski masks, gloves. We went into the bank. We found the manager, which we had been casing them. We knew who the manager was. We found the manager of the bank and said, hey, you, come on, go open the vault. First drawer you open better have a $50,000 bundle in it too. And we robbed the bank. Well, in the process of us robbing this bank, we had a high-speed chase with the police, and I got arrested. I went back to the feds. This time, I was facing 24 and a half years to life because they called me a career criminal. I had been to the feds twice. This was my third federal conviction. I was considered a career criminal. All my prior convictions was considered either violent or drug-related. So I was a career criminal. At 28 years old, I was facing 24 and a half years. 23 and a half years to life. I got sentenced to 24 years in federal prison in 1999. When I went to federal prison, I was 28 years old. I was still young and vibrant, but I was still very violent. I had a chip on my shoulder. And in the prison, I walked around, I carried knives, I threatened people. I just was angry and I was looking for trouble. I was actually wanting to fight or stab or do something to someone. And just so happened, there were a few guys in the prison that knew me. Some of them knew me from other prisons. Some of them knew me from the streets. They knew me from society. They had committed crimes with me. They knew what type of person I was. And they see me walking around the prison angry and whatnot. And they told me, they was like, hey, man, what is wrong with you? It was like, you got a release date. And they highlighted other people that were in the prison that I socialized with. And they were like, that guy got 7 life sentences. That guy got 2 life sentences. That guy got 150 years. You got 24 years. You can get out of prison. I heard that. I tried to ingest it, but I was still kind of, like, but what am I going to do? Okay, I might be able to get out in 20 years, but what am I going to do in 20 years? Rob another bank? Sell some more drugs? Like, I don't know what I'm here for. I don't know why did God put me on this earth? What's my purpose in life? So I started questioning what my purpose was in life. Now, during this whole time in prison, remember I said I love reading. So I've always read multiple books, I've studied different religions, I've studied different cultures, I've studied different languages. But I could never figure out why I was born or what my purpose was. So while I was in prison this last time, I think I had been in the prison maybe 3 or 4 years, and I was starting to calm down a little bit. And I was an institutional clerk in the laundry department. I was the clerk. I used to order the material for the laundry. I used to do the payroll for the inmates that worked in the laundry with me. And we used to fold sheets and just do stuff in the laundry. So I was a clerk at the laundry. And one of the guys that worked at the laundry with me, he couldn't read. So one morning, my superintendent came to me. He was like, this MF, I ain't gonna say what he said, but he said, this MF can't read. Fire him. Tell him he's fired. Tell him to go back to the unit. And I was like, hold on, wait a minute. Don't fire him. Let me work with him. Let him fold sheets in the back. I'll do his job in the morning. Don't fire him. Because one thing about prison, they have a thing called a good job. Just imagine a good job in prison. You're making like 17 cents an hour at the most, but it's considered a good job. Well, he had what was considered a good job, and I didn't want to see him lose that good job because he had a well-known name. I knew of him before I came to prison. In fact, when I was 14, 15 years old, he was very popular in our neighborhood. So I knew his name. I knew about him. He used to have money when I was young. So One day we were in the back and we were folding sheets together, and I asked him, I was like, man, is it true? Is it true that you can't read? And he was like, yeah, I ain't never been able to know how to read. So I was like, well, how did you get around? How did you, like, you had Mercedes Benzes, you had nice cars, you were the man. Like, I looked up to you. How did you survive when you couldn't read? And he explained to me, he said, man, I just knew landmarks. I knew where to turn. I knew where buildings were. I could recognize neighborhoods, and I knew how to get around, but he couldn't read. So anyway, me and him started going to the prison library 3 days a week, pulling out hooked on phonics. After some months, he was able to go to the library by himself and pull out hooked on phonics and practice his reading. When me and him was going down there and he started improving and he started being able to read sentences and words, it did something to me. It felt different. You know, I had been kept going around that NASCAR track, left turn, rob bank, sell drugs, shoot the police, do this, speed, lie. This time, it was a totally different feeling. You know, it was really the first time in my life that I did something for someone without any. I wasn't doing it for me. I didn't think I was going to get anything out of it. I wasn't doing it thinking I was going to get some money from him. It was just he couldn't read. And I said, okay, let's go to the library and see if I can help you, learn it. And when he started being able to read and he showed me, and he called me and he'd be like, look, man, and he would read certain things, it made me feel totally different. I think that was the first right turn that I made. Mm-hmm. But as I said, I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do in life because I didn't know what my purpose was. In fact, when my father used to visit me, I asked him, I said, Pops, like, why did you and my mom have me? What were y'all thinking about when y'all conceived me? What was my purpose? Like, why y'all bring me into this world? And he couldn't tell me. And I was still kind of perplexed because, I'm in prison. I'm in a maximum federal prison. People are getting stabbed. People are getting raped. People are getting killed. But I'm wrestling with what my purpose is in life. So I go from that prison. After being in that prison for 5 years, I got tired of being there. But before I left, I had developed a reputation on the prison compound, the prison yard, where I had become a peacemaker. I was the guy that they would come to, white guy come to me, hey man, I owe your black brother some money and he's talking about doing something to me. And this is gonna start a race riot. Is there anything you can do? I'd be like, here, how much money you owe him? Go pay him, or tell him to come to me and I'll pay it, don't worry about it. So after about 4 or 5 years, that's what I started doing. I was a peacemaker on the prison yard and I was participating in a lot of culture events. So I was leaning towards the right, but I was still looking at that NASCAR track. I ain't gonna lie. I was still looking at that NASCAR track. So I decided to get transferred. I requested a transfer to Terre Haute, Indiana. And the reason why I requested a transfer to Terre Haute, Indiana, you remember I talked about a little bit about my aunt who used to write me and come visit me when I was in prison before. Well, she was here in Indianapolis. And she had came to California a couple times to visit me while I was in prison in California. And so I said, like, why would I sit out in prison in California when my family, my father, my aunt, they all had moved back to Indianapolis? So I transferred to Terre Haute, Indiana. Once I got to Terre Haute, Indiana, I was introduced to a program. It was the it was the ISU college degree program. They had a degree program going on in ISU connected to the prison. They had professors from ISU coming into the prison teaching classes. So I signed up for ISU degree program and I earned my associate's degree in social behavior. Before I could earn my bachelor's degree, they canceled the program, of course. But I did earn my associate's degree in social behavior. And while I was in the college program, a friend of mine in the prison came to me. He was like, hey, Montez, he was like, will you teach the adult continued education class on African American history? And I was like, I don't have nothing to do with the education department. Forget them people. They be forcing people to go to class, and I don't want to have nothing to do with that. But they had came to me, and multiple people came to me because they knew I had a wealth of knowledge about Black history. So after about 4 or 5 guys on the prison yard had approached me and asked me to do it, I finally went to the education department and I was allowed to teach psychology, introductory course to psychology and African American history. So for the last 8 years that I was in prison, I taught those classes in the education department. Also, the last 5 years I was in federal prison, I started working in a program called Stages. Now, Stages was a program that was designed to help people who struggle with borderline personality disorder, and they use self-harm as a coping mechanism. Well, for you to be a mentor in this program, you had to take a peer forensic specialist apprenticeship through the Department of Labor, and you had to participate in intensive counseling with the psychology department and be trained to be a mentor. Well, I signed up for that program and I joined that program and I became one of their lead mentors, and I was responsible for helping to recruit and train and teach other inmates how to be mentors using dialectical behavior therapy and cognitive behavior therapy to help them gain better coping skills and whatnot. And we also work with their therapy sessions and whatnot. So I did that for the last 5 years that I was in prison, and felt like I was making a couple right turns. Like at this point now, I don't see the NASCAR track. I haven't stopped thinking about it, but I didn't see it anymore. I was making a right turn. You know, I'm starting to make right turns now, and I'm starting to enjoy it. What I didn't say earlier that I meant to say, that when my friend came to me and he was learning how to read, and I seen that joy on his face, and I knew that I helped him get there. That was a feeling I had never felt. And after that, every time I made a right turn, when I taught the classes on African American history, and guys would come up to me, man, what book did you get that out of? Man, I want to share that with my son. Hey, man, can you give me some more information on that? Just seeing them light up from that information. When I was in the Stages program and we were working with men who would commit self-harm, they would attempt to hang themselves, they would take a bunch of pills, they would swallow razor blades, they would do all types of self-harm. Being able to be in their therapy session, working with them and their therapist and encouraging them to adopt healthy coping mechanisms, being able to share different dialectical behavior therapy soft skills with them, just being able to work with them and seeing them overcome some of those struggles. When they wanted to commit self-harm and they come to me and say, man, I'm thinking about committing self-harm. Here's a razor, or I got a rope right here, I want to hang myself. And me being able to talk to them and give them dialectical behavior therapy and get them to see the gray and not commit self-harm, it made me feel a different type of way. So now I'm in prison and I'm looking to get out of prison. I've been in prison almost 16, 17 years, and I know I'm getting out of prison. And I'm like, man, what am I going to do? So the only thing I could think of is, what did I love doing, right? And I realized, wait a minute, I love teaching. But then I thought about it, I said, well, no state is going to give me a license to be a teacher. I got 3 federal felonies on my jacket. They're not going to allow me to be a teacher, so I can't be a teacher, so what am I going to do? So to be honest, I said, well, I'm going to go work in psychology because I love helping people through dialectical behavior therapy, and I love the work that I did in that program. So I was like, well, I'm going to go and do some psychology. But remember, I had become a mentor in the prison. So I had other guys in the prison coming to me. They were getting out years before me, sometimes 5, 6 years before me. And they were like, Montez, when I get out, I'm going to work with the kids. I'm going to work with the kids, the bad kids. I'm going to the neighborhood. I'm working with the kids. You know what y'all want to know what I said? I don't want to let me do with them little bad rascals. No, y'all go work with the kids. I'm going to go work with the adults. I would rather work with some psychotic people than work with you little bad young kids, right? So this is how I felt. I'm just being honest, right? So while I was in prison, I couldn't figure out exactly what I was going to do. In fact, I was planning on going back to college and getting my master's degree so that I could start working in psychology. That was my intention. Well, fast forward it to 2019. I've been teaching classes in the prison. I've been a mentor in the prison. Oh, I actually did publish a couple books. I wrote and had some books published while I was incarcerated. So I am an author. I think I published 4 books before I was released. But at this point, I'm about to get out of prison, and I'm still not sure. So remember that lady I told you that my aunt What I didn't tell you is I was in Terre Haute for 14 years. When I left California, after being in a maximum prison for 5, I came to Terre Haute, and I was in Terre Haute for 14 years. That woman came to see me every month for 14 years. My aunt was there every month for 14 years. At 68 years old, at 7:15 in the morning, in 2019, she was outside the prison to pick me up. Now, you know, when you come out of prison, oh, you wouldn't know this, but when you come out of prison, it's like, let's get away, right? So when I come out the prison, she's like, Mom, give me a hug. I'm like, hey, Auntie, we hug every month. Let's get in the car and drive away. We can get a hug later, right? So while we're in the car, we're on the highway coming back to Indianapolis, and she's like, Montez, you need to do this. When you get home, you need to do this. You need to go to these reentry seminars. You need to go here. You need to apply for this. And I was like a little shot. Okay, not a shot glass. I was like a little glass, a little cup. And she was like a giant pitcher of water. And you know what happens if you take a giant pitcher of water and you try to pour it in a little container? Most of it's going to come out, right? Well, that's how prison creates a level of anxiety and paranoia that's abnormal. Prison is desensitizing. Prison creates a mental state that's abnormal for society. We're on a higher level of paranoia. We're ready to fight and we're ready to go. We're at fight or flight at all times in prison because you never know when something's going to happen. So when you have somebody who's constantly bombarding you with information, telling you what you need to do, how you need to change. I'm in a car, we're on the freeway, and I'm having a panic attack. And I had to stop. I said, hold on, stop. You can't give it to me all at once. I can't absorb it. I'm not going to remember none of it, and I can't absorb it. I can't even see the value in it right now. Well, anyway, my aunt and my family was very patient with me when I got out of prison. And they waited for a few days, and then they sat me down and told me the same thing. You need to go do this. You need to go do that. You need to go do this. So when I got out in 2019, the first thing I did was I started going to the reentry seminar. The first reentry seminar I went to was at a church. I believe it was Eastern Star on 30th Street. And when I went to that seminar, I met a man by the name of Tony Lopez. And at the time, Tony Lopez was working for Cafe. And when I walked up to Tony Lopez, he was telling me about Cafe and what they did. And he was like, you need to meet that man over there. And he pointed to a man on the other side of the room. And I looked over and I was like, who are you talking about? That square-looking guy with the glasses on? The square-looking, that guy? He was like, yeah, that's who you need to meet. And that man's name was Ed Witowski. At the time, Ed Witowski was a mentor match manager for Trusted Mentors, right? So I'll go over and I introduce myself to Ed, and me and Ed is talking. And Ed is talking about Trusted Mentors and what they do. And I'm like, well, okay, that's great. I like what you guys do, but you know, I have a family that does all that for me. You know, I did my resume. I did all this stuff before I got out of prison. I appreciate what you do. I like what you do, but I'm not going to take advantage of your mentorship because I have people that's doing that. So then he flipped it on me and said, well, why don't you be a mentor? I said, hold on, wait a minute. Did you hear what I just said? I just got through doing 20 years. I need to get myself together. I don't have time to be trying to mentor nobody. Let me get myself together. Anyway, we exchanged numbers. Me and Ed Witowski exchanged numbers, and I continued to go to reentry seminars. I ended up at the Juvenile Justice Seminar at IUPUI. While I was at the Juvenile Justice Seminar at IUPUI, I met a lady by the name of Tallulah Easley, and she was the intensive family coordinator for a company called Youth Advocate Programs. So when I met her, I was in line to shake a young man's hand that had been on the panel, and I really appreciate what he had said. So I wanted to go over there and give him his props. And so I went over, and she was in line with me, and she was telling me about Youth Advocate Program. And she was like, hey, you should think about Youth Advocate Program. We work with kids on probation. You know what that did, right? The kids on probation are automatically clammed up, right? So she said, we work with kids on probation, and we help them. And then she's explaining to me, and I'm saying, well, I appreciate you considering me, but number one, I just got out of prison after doing 20 years. I got to get my own life together. I don't have time to be trying to help somebody else get their life together. Maybe after I get established, I'll volunteer, you know, and we can see if I can do anything. But right now, I got to focus on me. She was like, no, we want to offer you a job. I'm sorry, I do this a lot. I'm like scratching my head like, did you not hear what I just said? I just told you I just got you doing 20 years in prison. I just told you I have an extensive criminal background. DCS ain't gonna let me work with no kids. She says, don't you worry about that. You just come get your interview and let us take care of it. So I go to the interview, I meet the director. The director hires me on the spot. I'm still looking like, y'all just playing with my emotions right now, right? So they hire me on the spot. They say, go to DCS, do your fingerprints and all that. So I'm like, okay, this is a waste of time, but it ain't my time, so okay. I go do my DCS paperwork, I do my background check. What do you think they said? Have y'all seen his background? He robs banks. He sells drugs. He shoots the police. No, he can't work with no teenagers. However, there was a thing called a waiver program with DCS. And we found out about the waiver program and we submitted for a waiver. So in this waiver program, you have to list everything that you've done post-rehabilitation to change or to become a better person, right? And I put together the waiver program with Youth Advocates Program, and we put it together and we submitted it. And I received a waiver from DCS to work with kids on probation. I was scared as I was so scared because I did not think this was gonna happen. I was like, ain't no way in the world it ain't gonna happen. They're gonna look at my background and be like, nah, it's just a little bit too extensive. So anyway, I got the waiver. I was the first person to get a waiver for Youth Advocate Program in Marion County. And I started working with teenagers on probation. It was the right turn. When I started working with those young men and I was able to advocate for them in the courts when they had to go to court. Imagine me, I'm on federal parole. I just got through doing a urinalysis test with my parole officer. Now I'm standing in front of the judge, asking the judge not to send this young man a DLC and let me get him back in school and work with him. That was amazing. It was like me sitting in the probation office with this young man, and he's seeing his probation officer, and I'm arguing with the probation officer about why we don't need to send him to DLC, why we need to get him back enrolled in school or give him an ankle monitor instead of locking him up. Like, it was amazing. And then being able to actually see young men mature and learn things that just learning how to cook. One day I did a cooking class at Youth Advocate. They don't know how to cook. They don't know how to cook their own food. Seeing these young men and women, because we work with women too, seeing these young men and women grow and mature and gain insight, it was just amazing. It was another right turn. I loved it. I never thought I would, but I loved working with kids on probation. So I did that for almost 2 years. But while I was doing that, I also worked at Recycle Force. I was at Recycle Force as an intern case manager. Now, I had connected with Recycle Force as an intern case manager, but I had connected with Recycle Force at one of the reentry seminars that I went to. And I had connected with their ears department, their case managers, and I was working with their therapists for the people that had therapy sessions and whatnot. So it was more in my field what I like to do, right? But then I got a call about a year and a half later. I got a call from Ed Witowski. And Ed Witowski called me. He says, hey, Montez, would you be interested in a mentor match manager position? I said, what does that do? He says, well, as a mentor match manager, he recruits people to be mentors. He teaches them how to be mentors. And then he connects them to people who's struggling with homelessness or reentry or aging out of foster care. I was like, wait a minute, that kind of sounds like what I was doing in prison. Yeah. I would like to apply for that job. So I applied for that job and I got that job. And I left, I didn't leave Youth Advocate Program, but I left Recycle Force. I got that job and I was a mentor match manager, and I had the opportunity of training people to be mentors and connecting mentors to mentees. And I liked that job. I really enjoyed that job. I built relationships through that job. And while I was doing that job, I was blessed to get signed up to Habitat for Humanity. So I was part of Habitat for Humanity. I got my first home legally. I got my first home legally, and it was an amazing process. I actually learned about Habitat for Humanity because I wanted to take the teenagers that I was working with to do something to give back to the community. I was trying to find different things that they could do to give back to the community and learn, like, to be more service orientated, right? So I got into Habitat for Humanity, and I got a brand new home through Habitat. While I was at Trusted Mentors, I also was contacted from a friend or associate who told me about a job at another nonprofit organization, and they were looking for a facilitator, someone to facilitate their reentry program. Okay, so that particular job, I applied for that job, and just so happened it was with a woman. It was up under a director who I had met in 2019 when I was doing my circuit of reentry programs and whatnot. And I had met her, I knew about her program, but that same thing I told Ed Witowski and Tony Lopez, like, the things that you do, I appreciate it, love it, but I have the best aunt in the world. Like, my aunt has made sure that I knew all this, that I took care of all this. I had resumes. I had all that before I walked out the door. So when I met her in 2019, I told her, hey, great program, love what you do. In 2021, I was sitting in front of her for an interview for a job to work on her team. I was like, wow, okay. So this job entailed me teaching 4 classes a week. These are job readiness classes, right? We teach men and women soft skills and hard skills, how to use a computer, how to use Google Docs, Google Sheets, different platforms on the computer. And we teach them soft skills as far as how to communicate, how to maintain a full-time job, like how to come to work on time, how important it is to be pleasant when you come to work. We had to teach them so many soft skills, right? I think that was the right term. Y'all think that's the right term?
Yes.
And guess what? I do that right now to this day. In fact, I'm a supervisor at my company, and I supervise other facilitators who teach classes all over Marion County. We also have people down in Bloomington, and we're moving to Puerto Rico real soon. You might know who I work for. So that's what I do today. I am also a big advocate for reentry. I sit on the board of directors of Storyteller Arts, which Storyteller Arts is the organization that I first started telling my story. Now, you guys just heard most of my story, right? Let me tell you why I started telling my story with Storyteller Arts. The reason that I started sharing my story was, number one, I was working for Trusted Mentors, and Trusted Mentors, Storyteller Arts, and St. Luke's were working together on a project called Hear Our Story. And as a mentor match manager, my supervisor came in and said, hey, Montez, we need you to find people who would be willing to tell their story through Hear Our Story. And they gave me the parameters. So I'm on my computer, I'm making phone calls, I'm sending emails. She comes to my desk, Montez, you got that list ready? Here it is. I give her the list. She looks at the list. She's standing at my cubicle looking at the list right there. She says, here you go. I said, what? She says, you forgot somebody. I said, who? You. Why your name ain't on that list? I said, oh, I thought I was just supposed to be finding other people. Okay. I was a little scared. I said, okay, I'm going to write my name on the list, right? I write my name on the list. But in truth, we had a conversation about it, and she was like, this might help you. You just never know. She must have seen something that I hadn't recognized, and it took me a while to recognize it after the conversation, but I realized it. When you get out of prison, you have to tell someone, when someone says, hey, like, where have you been? What have you been doing? Why'd you move here? Oh, I was in prison for 20 years. It brings up a level of anxiety because you never know how a person is going to respond. One minute we were talking about having lunch tomorrow and maybe investing in something. Next minute I tell you I was in prison for 20 years. You can be like, I'm not going to lunch with him. Right? So I was going through a lot of anxiety just being back in society and having to explain to people that I had been in prison 20 years. So when I started with Hear Our Story and Storyteller Arts, I was able to go around and tell my story, and it was like, it was therapeutic. It was really therapeutic. It helped. It made me more comfortable. It allowed me to be able to not only just share my story and get that release or my stress levels come down, but it also allowed me to see the value in me sharing my story. So I connected with Storyteller Arts, and I started going around to different churches and libraries and whatnot, telling my story, hear our story. And while I was doing that, I also had joined the Constructing Our Future. Constructing Our Future is an organization that helps women coming out of incarceration find housing. In fact, we have a house where we house 4 women up in Broad Ripple right now. We're in the process of getting other properties, and that's what this organization do. And I've been on the board of this organization for over almost 3 years now, right? Bunch of right turns now. I tell people all the time, I turn right and I'll go around the corner to keep from turning left. I'll drive an extra block just to keep from. Well, I turn left, I can turn right. So anyway, I'm on the board of directors of Constructing Our Future. I'm on the board of directors of Storyteller Arts. And through Storyteller Arts, not only did I get to go around to churches, and do I still go around to churches and colleges and schools and libraries and speak, I also got the opportunity to teach teenagers again. But remember when I said I was in prison and I knew I wanted to be a teacher, but I was like, nobody would ever let me teach kids? I got this background. I never understood the concept of a teacher versus an educator. Great concept, I like it. So now I teach in Renaissance School on the east side of Indianapolis. I teach young men and women how to tell their story. I teach them the basics of storytelling, right? And I enjoy it, especially when a young man or a young woman gets up in the class and they start telling their story and they use some of the gems, whether it was body language or eye contact, when they use some of the gems that we give them in that class, I love it. It's like, it's heaven all over again for me. So what I have learned, which took me a long decades, I ain't gonna say how old, but it took me a long time to learn, is that I love teaching and helping people. That's what I love to do. And I'm good at it. And that's what I do every day. I try to find a way to teach someone something. I don't care if I'm teaching you how to change a flat tire, or if I'm teaching you how to log into your computer or use an app on your phone. Whenever you can teach someone and it helps someone, it just brings me joy. And this is what I do today. So, Montez Day, I'm blessed to be a homeowner. I am blessed to be a supervisor in a nonprofit organization working with people who've been touched by the justice system and giving them jobs and helping them by providing wraparound resources. I love my job and I love my life. It's amazing. I was featured on the front cover of the Los Angeles Times, the March 18th edition. They did an article on me and my original co-defendant. Do you remember I said I went to prison in '99 for armed bank robbery? Well, my associate, my friend who went to prison with me for that armed bank robbery, he was released 2 years after me. And he was rearrested last year in December for bank robbery. And there was a story in the Los Angeles Times this year comparing me and him. Unfortunately, he is in prison right now fighting for his life. He's 71 years old. Mm. I could be in prison right now at 53 years old fighting for my life. I did a project with Gang in what is it, MCRC? Marion County Reentry Coalition. Yes, Gang and Marion County Reentry Coalition. I did a project with them called Reflections, where they had 5 people that have been released from prison, and they did some artwork. They took our pictures and they had an artist recreate some of our pictures, and they recorded our stories, and you can click on the little thing and hear our story. And right now, it was in the airport for Second Chance Month for the whole month. And right now it's at the Martindale Brightwood Library. It's up there. But they moved the art exhibit around. So I've been part of that. I've been able to be part of a lot of great things that, one, put a spotlight on reentry and reentry programs, and 2, help people. And that's why I'm so grateful and so thankful for my life and where I'm at in life. I wake up every morning and I tell the people in my class, when they come to class, I say, tell me something good that happened in the last 7 days. You know, and I read the last 7 days. And they, I can't. And some of them, oh, ain't nothing good, man. My lights got cut off, or my car broke down. Did nothing good happen in the last 7 days. Did you wake up this morning? Huh? Did you wake up this morning? If you woke up this morning, that was good, because that gives you another day, another opportunity to make changes in your life. Any day you wake up is a good day. Because wherever you were yesterday, you don't have to be there today, because you can make changes in your life. You can make a decision. You can do things different. I did an interview on Fox 59, and I told him, I said, the problem is, they say never judge a book by its cover. I say never judge a person by a couple chapters of their lives. Our lives are full of multiple chapters. Some of them are scary, but they don't define us. We're not defined until we pass away. Never give up. And if you see us on that NASCAR track, making them left turns, let us make our lap. But guess what? If we keep going around, eventually we're going to get dizzy. We're going to want to get off that track. That's when you help us. See, we need more people to be involved in these programs, not for the sake of just resources. And when I say resources, I'm talking about resources of all types. But for the sake of people. Today here, we're talking about diversity and why diversity is so important. And I love the message that I heard earlier. And I'm a firm believer. I tell people all the time, I don't care what you say. I don't care what religion you claim. I don't care how much money you have, and I don't care how old or young you are. I care what you do. How do you treat the universe that you've been blessed to be in? How do you treat other human beings? That's how I judge you. I don't care what you say. I don't care what you got. I don't care what you did in life, your accomplishments. What are you doing today? Because every day is another opportunity for you to be great. I invite everyone in this room. Let's be great. Thank you.